Good morning, everybody. Now, yesterday, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Rishi Sunak, who you don't see much of, mostly, popped up and made a speech. And his speech was about putting the country right, even though after 13 years of fake conservative government, they are the ones that have mostly made and created the problems that we now have. Obviously, they came after 13 years of Blair and Brown and New Labour, which created all kinds of problems and chaos in the United Kingdom. But the Conservative Party is supposed to be a party that puts things right and is fiscally, financially responsible and is socially conservative. But over the last 13 years, they've been exactly the opposite of what they're supposed to be. And in fact, they've been worse than Blair and Brown. They've been more financially irresponsible. They've been more socially liberal and cultural Marxist than even Blair could have possibly imagined over the times of Cameron, May, Johnson, and now Sunak, who doesn't seem to be doing much at all apart from gaslighting people. And in his speech yesterday, he listed 5 things that he says he's going to put right in the next 2 years. Never mind that when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer for the last 2 years, he was the one who created a lot of these issues and messes. So this is what he said he's going to do. He's going to halve inflation. Well, he said that's his plan. He's not going to do it. Grow the economy. See that the national debt is falling. Deal with waiting lists on the NHS and stop the small boats. He doesn't actually say he's going to stop them. He just says small boats. That was in his plan anyway, but I assume that means he thinks he's going to try to do something about the mass rapid immigration crisis. Let's look at all of these things in turn and see why they are actually the source of the problem rather than the solution to the problem, and what the solutions really are and what we really need to be doing in each of these cases and more. Obviously, there's many things that are issues in the UK that he hasn't even touched on and mentioned. It's interesting, obviously, he's a financial guy, and 3 of these things are financial, and then only 2 of the things, the minority, are other things. Of course, you know, finance, economy is important, but there are many wider issues as well in society that needs to be dealt with, that they've caused the problems with as well. So, halving inflation. Well, officially inflation at the moment is 10%, but unofficially, you know, it's 20 to 30%, because if you go into your supermarket and you want to get, you know, a bag of pasta, for example, you know, the start of 2022, it was £3, now it's £4, you know, for a big bag of pasta. So for normal everyday people, real inflation is much higher than what the government officially admits, and it always has been for a long time. So he says he's going to cut inflation, but he's the one who's been causing inflation because of increasing the national debt by £400 billion over the last 2 years when he was Chancellor. He's literally added 25% to the currency stack, to the national debt, which is going to feed in to 25% inflation over the next year or two after you do it. That's baked in, and he's continuing to borrow £200 billion thereabouts every year, which is going to continue to add to inflation. If you want to get control of inflation, you need to stop borrowing extra money and adding to the national debt. Well, that's his third point. He wants to reduce the national debt, but as I've just said, he's the one who's been increasing the national debt beyond all previous prime ministers, beyond all precedent that we've ever had in the country. In fact, when the fake Conservatives came to power, this is shocking, the national debt in the UK was £1 trillion. Well, that's bad enough. But now it stands at £2.5 trillion. Nearly £2.45 trillion. So the fake Conservatives have added more to the national debt in their 12 and a half years in office than in all of the previous 1,000 years combined before they came into power in 2010. They are a disaster for the economy. So I wouldn't trust Rishi Sunak as far as I can throw him. I could probably throw him a long way because he's a lot smaller than me, but I still wouldn't trust him as far as I can throw him because he's the one who has been adding to our national debt extremely and profligately over the last 2 years, and he's still doing it now, and that doesn't seem like it's going to change. So all his protestations that he's going to reduce the national debt are just an absolute load of nonsense because he's continuing to splash out money here, there and everywhere, HS2, migrant hotels, foreign aid, diversity officers, weapons to the Zelensky regime, or quangos, all kinds of other things, inefficiency in the NHS, which is massively inefficient and not going to do anything about that either. So he is the one who's going to contribute to that by continuing to borrow and spend in a way that Tony Blair would have been incredibly jealous of. He makes Tony Blair and Gordon Brown look like they're responsible. That's how bad they are, these fake conservatives we've got at the moment. There we go. So he says he wants to grow the economy. Now, I'm no fan of Liz Truss, but one good thing that she did want to do was lower taxes in order to give people more of their own income back to them. That's not the way of looking at it. The government takes some of our income in tax when it gives you a tax cut. It's not giving you back your money. It's like not taking as much of your money as they did before. So if they stop taking a high proportion of people's money and people's income for taxation, so people keep more of their earnings, then that feeds into growth. It takes a year or two to feed into the system. But what she wanted to do was to lower get rid of the high rate of tax, income tax of 45% altogether, keep corporation tax at 19%, and that would have tried to help with economic growth. Low taxation leads to more economic growth. The opposite is true. If you have higher taxation, that puts a dampener on growth because people don't work so hard because they think, well, why should I bother to work when the government's taking, a higher proportion of my income? Rishi Sunak has done exactly the opposite of that. No, Liz Truss was wrong economically because she wanted to lower taxes but pay for it with more borrowing rather than cutting spending, which is the wrong way to pay for tax cuts, if you like. Rishi Sunak just wants more borrowing, more spending and higher taxes. He's putting up income tax, putting up national insurance, putting up corporation tax, thinking of all these other taxes, possibly an increase on duty on petrol and diesel coming in March this year. So, that's going to dampen economic growth, not lead to more. You need to lower taxes and you need to fund that by lowering spending. So all those things that I mentioned before, sending £2.5 billion a year to Ukraine, for example, which we shouldn't be doing. We should be spending that money here or using it to fund tax cuts or reducing our public spending. Migrant hotels, which of course comes in with the next one of the next points. We need to reduce our spending on those things so that at least we don't put tax rates up. We keep them where they are. And then when we've got our national debt down, we can start to reduce tax rates as well, which then feeds into economic growth. But Rishi Sunak is doing the exact opposite of that. He is in a spending, borrowing and taxation death spiral. So we need to get rid of him because he is not financially responsible. When I say get rid of him, I mean at the ballot box. Okay, just in case anyone thinks I'm not suggesting anything different to that. So then he says waiting lists. Well, he has created, and the fake conservatives have created, the problem with waiting lists on the NHS, either for a GP or for surgery, because they went into all of these lockdown measures. and then just focused the NHS entirely on COVID, people who want knee operations, hip operations, normal things that are considered non-urgent, even though for the people who want them, they are very urgent. They're just getting their appointments cancelled, postponed for years now. Whereas if they hadn't have done all of this lockdown and totally changed everything to focus on this, everything that they were doing in the lockdown period, then there wouldn't be this huge issue with waiting lists that we have. But added on to that, they've reduced the number of beds in the NHS drastically. They've actually closed many wards and even whole hospitals and accident and emergency units and tried to consolidate everything into bigger central units rather than having sort of smaller hospitals in smaller towns. So often, if you need to go to a hospital, you had a hospital maybe in your local town of 20,000 people before. That's been closed because now the plan is everyone needs to go to these big central units in towns of 250,000 people or more. So they're trying to centralize hospital services and so on. GPs have closed, dentist surgeries have closed, so there's longer waiting lists because there just aren't so many doctors, GPs, dentists, pharmacists, and hospitals around anymore as we had 13 years ago. We need local services for local people. And we need to do that in the long term by training enough of our own young people to be nurses and midwives and doctors and pharmacists and dentists and healthcare assistants and so on. We need to train them in this country, and we need to remove the caps on training rather than trying to forever bringing migrants from abroad to fill in the gaps which we have because we're not training enough of our own young people in this country. And the NHS is completely and totally inefficient. Billions and billions and tens of billions of pounds are wasted every year on procurement, on management, on diversity officers, and all kinds of other nonsense. And all the PPI schemes that were started with Labour and so on that we're still paying for now, we're paying through the nose. And the money, a lot of the money that's going into the NHS is going straight into the coffers of the capital finance firms that funded PPI in the Blair era, and it's not going on patient care. That is a big issue that people don't really talk about. It's very difficult to get rid of those things because they're contracts that have written. In my view, they're odious, but we certainly don't need to make any more, and we certainly need to fund things from the current financial account and not get into any silly financial speculation for building new capital assets like hospitals and so on, as was done in the Blair era. So that is a big issue. The NHS needs to be sorted out, but essentially we need more hospitals, more beds. Very, very simple. Stop closing beds and stop getting rid of beds and stop closing wards in hospitals. Then we wouldn't have so many waiting lists. And we've got to make sure that we have more people on the front line doing actual healthcare rather than managers just looking at compliance to the Equality Act and all this kind of nonsense. There we go. And then he says, finally, small boats. Well, the fake Conservatives have added to the immigration crisis of the Blair and Brown era, and they've not just added to it, they've doubled it and tripled it and quadrupled it. I mean, we had last year 1.1 million migrants coming to the UK legally, and on top of this year, we've now got over 45,000 that we know about crossing the channel in small dinghies. Now that's a huge problem, because military-age men are being put in hotels around the country, and they've been saying for the last 3 years, we're going to do something about it. We're going to have a meeting with France and give them some money so we can have another meeting and discuss what we might do about having a meeting in the future to stop this. And still the boats keep coming in greater and greater number, and the military-age men keep coming in greater number and being farmed out into hotels around the country, and towns and cities that are small, even villages where people simply can't cope with this number of military-age male migrants being suddenly planted in their small towns or villages. And the fake Conservatives are actively doing this because they're sending the Border Force and the Royal Navy out in the middle of the night to meet the boats which are being escorted by the French Navy and French Coast Guard, and they're doing pickups, and then they're bringing them to Dover like a taxi service. So they are actively helping and aiding and abetting this mass migration movement across the channel. And all he's saying about, oh, well, we're going to do something in the next couple of years. In the next couple of years, there'll be another 100,000 people coming over across the channel while he obfuscates. That seems like what's going to happen, They say, oh, you can't really do much until we leave the ECHR, and we won't do that. That's the European Convention on Human Rights. We won't do that until after the next election, because we'll need a mandate from the voters to do that. Where then we'll leave it. So we'll give our year's notice to leave. And so then in 3 years' time, we'll be able to do something about stopping the votes. No, push them back to France now. That's what you need to do. Get the Navy to push them back, not bring them over. It's very simple, and they won't do it. But that's just the illegal part. The legal migration is over 20 times more than the illegal migration, and that is causing a rapid increase in population density around the whole nation, particularly in the larger cities, which are being turned into soulless hellholes with massive blocks of flats everywhere, where there used to be lovely, beautiful, historic neighborhoods and beautiful towns and cities, which are being ruined with these huge new soulless blocks to put in 1 million new people every year that are coming to the country legally. So we need, as well as dealing with illegal immigration, we need strict caps on legal migration to bring it down from 1.1 million to 1 or 200,000 a year. Particularly, we need caps on students. We shouldn't be having 400,000 foreign students coming to the UK every year. 100,000 max. You don't need any more than that. You don't need people coming over to do noddy courses, and then, that's not going to do them or anybody in the UK economy any good whatsoever. And we need strict caps on workers, low-skilled and semi-skilled workers particularly. Look, obviously, if someone's coming to the country to start a business, or they've got a high skill, they're an engineer or something, they need to be let in if there's not someone to do the job at the moment. And that includes doctors and so on at the moment, until we train up enough of our own young people and to do those jobs in healthcare that need to be done. But what we shouldn't be doing is another thing he alluded to, which was it's going to make kids stay at school longer and learn maths until they're 18 years old. Look, that's absolutely ridiculous. There's 5 to 10% of people between 16 and 18 maybe stay at school and do an A-level in maths. I don't know exactly how many. Not a high percentage of the population that goes on to do A-level maths. And that's because they're good at maths, and it's useful for them to learn advanced calculus and statistics and and mechanics and trigonometry and all these kind of things. Most people don't need to stay in school and learn maths after the age of 16, because they don't need those things for any kind of job that they're going to do, particularly, if they're going to, just work in a shop and make coffee or serve customers and, or if they're going into the artistic fields and writing and so on. Most people should learn all of the maths they need by the time that they're 16, an O level, a GCSE in maths. It should be enough to give you the basic skills that everybody needs to survive in life. I mean, I learned the basic things I use every day now when I was still in primary school. By the time I was about 10, you need to add, subtract, divide, multiply in your head, which most people can't do anymore because they just stick it in a calculator. But you need to do mental arithmetic, do percentages, do fractions, be able to draw a simple graph, interpret a simple graph, interpret tables of numbers and understand what they mean. Those are all things that most kids in my day could do by the time they were 11. So keeping kids in school till they're 18 to learn those things, which if they don't know those things by the time they're 16, they can't get a grip of them by the time they're 16. They're not going to get a grip on them by the time they're 18. The best thing for people who are not academically gifted is not to keep them in school till they're 18. It's to let them go out and get an entry-level job when they're 16, because they will mature so much more by working for 2 years, even if it's just cleaning the floor in a supermarket or serving coffee or making sandwiches. They will mature so much more in those 2 years than if you keep them in a school or a college in a classroom to learn stuff that they can't get a grip on, and they will have lost 2 years of salary and wages and maturing. So for people who are not academically gifted or not technically gifted, who won't go into, learn a vocation like, plumbing or engineering or building or something, that's another very valid route. For those people who are just, suited to an entry-level job, a simple job, let them leave school at 16, get a job, earn a minimum wage. They'll earn, they'll earn 20 grand a year. They'll earn 40 grand between the ages of 16 and 18, which will set them up nicely for when they become an adult. So it's completely the wrong and ridiculous thing to suggest that part of the solution to all of the crises that this fake Conservative government has made, on top of the new Labour government, which created crisis after crisis as well, that it's ridiculous to suggest that the solution to that is for kids to stay in school until they're 18 and learn more maths. That's just absolute nonsense. We need the exact opposite of that. Get people in jobs on the path that is most suited to them. If it's for an entry-level job, do an entry-level job. If it's for technical training, do technical training. Start learning how to be a bricklayer. Make some walls, build some walls when they're the age of 16. Or if they're academic, yes, then keep them in school and put them on the track towards university to do high-value courses that really benefit people, like engineering or chemistry or maths in university for the 5% of people who might go on to do maths or some kind of numerical-related course. That's what we need, not this crazy idea of just infantilizing everybody even more, on top of the nonsense he spouted about the economy and the NHS, which they've created the problems in, and immigration, which again they've created the problems in. But there's nothing in his speech about any kind of cultural issues and all the insanity of wokery which is infesting and drowning our country at the moment. There's absolutely no mention of that whatsoever. And that is a huge, huge issue that we need to sort out. We need to get rid of all of these laws that put in place the concept of hate into law, so that then people's free speech is impinged upon, and everybody has to pay homage to all of the cultural Marxist narratives that are coming from the far left. And if you don't do that, you find that you get no platformed and cancelled, and sometimes even kicked out of your jobs. There's no mention of that whatsoever from a so-called conservative prime minister. And that's because he isn't conservative at all. Who is conservative? I am. And so is the Heritage Party. And we are now a growing band of members with more and more candidates who are ready to stand in the local elections on 4th of May and in the general election whenever it happens. So if you agree with what I've said and how ridiculous this fake Conservative Party is, and can see the sense in what I'm saying to you that needs to happen, which is real conservatism, nothing to do with the fake Conservative Party, then please come and join me in the Heritage Party. If you join us as a member, it really helps us. We get more influence and we can do more things, and we can support more candidates. And if you're interested in joining the fight politically and standing as a candidate yourself, do join us as well. heritageparty.org is our website. You can join there and you can read our manifesto there. And I'm going to do some updates to our manifesto this month. So there'll be some new things coming, a new section on honouring the military covenant, for example, and a new section on healthcare and housing too, and other things that are not in there at the moment that we'll be releasing this month. So that's exciting. Please come and join us. Also, if you could do as well, please do give me a thumbs up for this video and subscribe to my channel because that helps me as well. If you got to the end of this, thank you so much for listening, and let's go forward and be the change that our country needs. Thanks everyone. God bless you all.